kind of way. So just relax. And Paul and we're going to just, quickly summarize it, not really cover everything, but just give you a sketch and then chat about just some moments that stood out to us. But in terms of summary, I mean, I have like 4 just quick things. Do you mind if I just run through them?
Do it. If you can bring it down to 4 points, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. But any summary of any great book is insufficient. But anyway, just to anchor you a little bit. So at the end of book 3, Telemachus and Nestor's son Pisistratus leave Sparta. I mean, they leave and land in Sparta, which is the next place Telemachus is slated to go to, and that's ruled, as Paul said, by Menelaus, who fought with Odysseus. It's King Agamemnon's brother, the head of all the Greeks' brother, and it's his wife Helen, whose abduction by the Trojans ended up leading to the Trojan War. So there's all kinds of interesting history, and there's even some debate among scholars as to whether Helen was abducted or left. Which is
and you did some of those edges in this book. You can if you have that in mind, you poke around and listen to the lines, and you see it's a real issue. Yeah.
So early on, I think you walk into this landscape, and we're just pounded over the head with the fact that Menelaus is the wealthiest man in the known world. So he's the wealthiest man in the known world. He's married to the most beautiful mortal woman in the known world. That's his circumstance. Yeah. Telemachus hears stories about his father, weeps, and Helen, it's the first instance of the poem of self-medication. It's not the last instance. Helen gives drugged wine, which translations say in different ways, removes the capacity for grief. Separate conversation, but a lot of ink is being spilled right now on that line. Yeah. A key part of Xenia is you let your host sleep the night. So there's that trust that you feed them, you bathe them, and you let them sleep the night. So the guests sleep. Menelaus found, and then Menelaus tells Telemachus of Menelaus's own Odyssey home, Odysseus, his own Odyssey on the way home to Sparta, which euphemistically includes, like, I acquired wealth in Egypt, which is to say raping and pillaging. It isn't like investing. You know what I mean? He's not investing in stocks. He's
Silicon Valley Bank or something like that.
No. And then secondly, he has, again, the whole point of books 3 and 4 is fact-finding about Odysseus. He gets nothing in book 3. Here we are. We're halfway through book 4. Telemachus has to be thinking, what the heck am I doing here? Menelaus says, I met Proteus, the shape-shifting sea god, who, and this is, I make sure we look at this before the kids read it, only because it's wicked easy to get lost here. Proteus is, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but he's basically held down by Menelaus.
Yeah.
And he's changing into all these shapes. It's bananas. It's crazy. But he's the one, because he's sort of a god of the sea, knows that Odysseus is with Calypso. So that's where Telemachus hears that his dad's alive. This is a play within a play, by the way. This is like various scenes in Shakespeare. It's a play within a play. We are watching Menelaus narrating this moving story to Telemachus. There's like a layered thing happening. The chapter ends with this weird abrupt shift back to Ithaca, with Penelope being sad and the suitors lying in ambush waiting for Telemachus. This is just a rough sketch, but we have the wealthiest man in the world, the most beautiful man in the world, Menelaus telling stories of his past that make him weep. We have Egypt, we have shape-shifting gods, we have suitors they're ready to kill. And that's just like a very rough sketch.
It's true. Like if you strip out, and it takes a ton of work to do it. I mean, you got to read through it several times and talk about getting lost. It really is like trying to sail back home from Troy. You're just going to get shipwrecked about 20 times doing it. But in the end, it is, I think, Jay, your summary is good. In the end, it is Pisistratus and Telemachus journey on across land this time, not in the boat. From Pylos to Sparta, they meet Menelaus with the purpose of finding out the original journey. The original goal, which Telemachus stated back in Ithaca when he left. I'll find out if my dad, if there's some word of him coming home. If we hear word, we'll come back. We'll give him a year. And if he doesn't show up, we'll hold a funeral. We'll move on. If we find out that he's dead, we'll go ahead and hold a funeral now and move on. So that mission is still there. And in this, as you say, so simply, he goes and meets Menelaus, who's in a position to know. Menelaus tells him I heard from this weird story, which we'll dig into, that your father is still alive and weeping on an island. And that's kind of it, really. Like that's the important thing. Then, scene change back in Ithaca at this very moment, as Jay was saying, there's drama going on. And so the setup when we leave Telemachus is that he's in big trouble and he doesn't know it. The big trouble is the suitors they've got sharpshooters up in the trees ready to assassinate him when he makes his way back home. And Penelope finds out. When we last knew, Penelope had not heard. She didn't know that Telemachus had left. Eurycleia kept the secret. And now she knows, and she's super sad. Okay, that's simple. You think, wow, that's the longest book, in the Odyssey. I could write that in 4 pages. But what is interesting here is all the other things, and there's a ton. There's a ton. So getting to that, and I think getting your students through this, and maybe trying to keep them from having that sort of mindset of just, let's Google the chapter and find out what it's about, but wandering around through it, finding out what Homer thinks is important for us to know, and asking questions why, and then kind of luxuriating in it, really, and just let yourself be. I'm mystified. There's several things in here that are on my list of those things I still haven't looked up, and I don't want to. I don't want to know what the scholars think. I still want to live with it and try to make sense of it from my deepening understanding of the characters involved. And there's a couple of those things in this chapter for me.
Yeah, and this is one of those, if you're teaching or if you're a student leading a class or just reading it in a reading group, any chapter this is true for, but the reader response approach works with really great books because it almost doesn't matter what a kid notices. So if you have a class of 20 people and you ask or a reading group with X number of people, and you ask what passage stands out to you the most for whatever reason, and you list them somewhere, you're going to get a really interesting tour. And what stands out to one person, which might be like stories of a father that a kid has never met, and that might stand out to you for some reason, and the other person might be dealing with more supernatural. It almost doesn't matter. There's so much going on here that I don't think anybody should feel obligated to sort of dig into every moment. It's what you're saying. Enjoy the adventure of it.
Yes. It's not like a murder mystery where it's carefully laid out and you have to pay attention to the right details or you won't figure it out. You're right, Jay. This is not that sort of book. The plot part you can get. I mean, there are details that we just went over and you can find those. The rest of it, though, is just color and background and fullness that makes this more and more interesting, makes these people more and more compelling. All right, so how do you want to break into the weirdness? This is the weirdest book. This is the weirdest book.
Yeah, I love it. We were talking about it, Why don't you, because I did a bunch of talking, do you want to start with your essential quotation and talk a bit, and then I'll do mine?
Yeah, sure. The essential quote, you know what? I say sure, but I don't know that I really have a. I don't know if I have the essential an essential quote from this for me. I mean, I think I would have to go to if I'm pushed on that. I would have to say you have to go all the way through the chapter to maybe one of two scenes. I'll do one, and that is really where Menelaus reveals to Telemachus what he's found out about his father. So that's about 3/4 of the way in. It's after this extremely weird scene where the old man of the sea, Proteus's daughter, tells Menelaus, for whatever reason, how to capture his father, her father, this Proteus character, and find out whatever he wants to find out from him. So they go through this whole ordeal, which I'll just skip. And he compels Proteus to talk to him. And he asks Proteus essentially two questions. One, how do I get home? How do I get out of here? Because they're stuck. There's no wind. They're in the doldrums. They need to get out. What god did I offend? And how can I fix that? Proteus tells him. While he's got him, while you've got a prophet on the hook, like spewing details, go ahead and ask some more questions. So Menelaus asks him, when we split up back at Troy to head back home. I know Nestor and I, made it this far. Nestor probably made it home, but of the other people, who made it home? Who didn't? And Proteus says, well, lots of people made it home, but of the admiralty, of the captains, there's a couple who died. He wants to tell him about, and the drama here is that one of the people who died is Menelaus' brother. And then we're back to the story of Agamemnon's death again, and of Orestes and the revenge and the whole thing. It just right. It's back on the page again. In this case, so that's a thread of continuity in this weirdness. We get a little more details about how Agamemnon died exactly. And there was an ambush, and there were people watching and waiting for him. And it echoes this thing that we're about to find out, which is that Telemachus is going to be entered into the same story. There's going to be an ambush waiting for him. And so one of the things that this does is build drama and build tension. Because when Telemachus goes back home, when Odysseus finally goes back home, they stand the chance of, and you're reminded this over and over, they stand the chance of suffering the same fate that Agamemnon does. If they're not, and you have to fill in the blank, if they're not pious enough, if they're not careful enough, if they're not all of these things. So there's real risk. And you see it because Agamemnon's the king of all the kings, and he dies horribly. It's awful. So Proteus tells Menelaus this about his brother. Menelaus is angry and upset and despondent. But then he tells him, he says, well, is there anyone else? Who you said? Well, Proteus says, there's 3 guys I can tell you about. And so Menelaus says, well, who's the third guy? And this third guy is Odysseus. So through all this drama, Telemachus hears that, not directly, but very indirectly, that his father is still alive. So Menelaus says, the old man of the sea, this guy who can tell you things, who knows things, whose daughter is the knowing goddess, told me that Odysseus is not dead, but that he's shipwrecked, and he's on shore weeping, wishing he was getting home this whole time. Yeah. So that's got to be the essential thing, I guess, because that's what Telemachus is here for. If you're trying to stick to the plot, that's what Telemachus is here for, and he gets his information.
Yeah, that's good. Mine is